The joke landed, and she said, "When?" No laughter, no softening of it into something safer. Just that word, delivered flat and calm, with a seriousness that had no business being there. I had said it easily. Without planning it, we should just run away, pick somewhere, become untraceable, and I'd heard the words leave my mouth with a smile and assumed they dissolve the way offhand things between close friends always do. Into a laugh, into a moment, into whatever came next. She didn't laugh. She set her wine glass down on the side table with a careful, deliberate click. She tilted her head once to the right, the specific tilt she used when she was actually deciding something, and she looked at me with an expression I didn't have a quick name for. "When?" she said. Flat, calm, asking a real question. I had nothing. That is the sentence I spent 3 weeks not knowing what to do with. My name is Owen Callahan. I'm 32. I coordinate logistics for a mid-sized distribution company, vendors, schedules, the kind of work whose measure of success is nothing going wrong, which means most of your wins are invisible to everyone, including yourself. I have a 1-bedroom apartment, a functional coffee machine, and a shelf of books I keep meaning to get back to. My life is orderly in the way the life of someone who manages things for a living tends to be orderly. What it had not been, for 4 years, was simple. Her name was Margot. Margot Shen, 29, who did illustration work out of the corner of her apartment that had been designated the living room and had become, by gradual accumulation, a studio. Book covers mostly, some editorial work, occasional projects she took on because they interested her rather than because they paid well. She had dark eyes and paint-stained knuckles on most days, and a laugh she aimed at you like she was making sure you were specifically the reason for it. She wore the same ring every day, a small, twisted silver band, bought from a market stall years ago, long since oxidized to something darker and more specific to her. Above her desk, she kept a postcard pinned to the wall. A small fishing village on the French coast, pale stone houses stepping down to a harbor, boats, a gray-blue sea. The postcard was old in the way things get old when they're handled, slightly bleached. The corners thickened. She had owned it since before I knew her. She had never been to that place. I had never asked about it. I had never treated it as something worth asking about. How we met. A birthday party 4 years ago. A mutual friends. Both of us independently deciding to leave at the same time. Both independently heading for the same street corner to get a cab. It was raining. We'd each grabbed the same umbrella from the row by the door. The party's umbrella, not belonging to either of us, and discovered this fact standing under it in the rain. By the end of the cab ride, we had plans for the following Saturday. We had been plans for the following Saturday people ever since. 4 years of it. We had never been anything more. In the way you keep not crossing a line until the line has become such a permanent feature of the landscape that you stop thinking of it as a decision and start thinking of it as a fact about the terrain. I had told myself, on more occasions than I was comfortable counting, that this was because what we had was too valuable to risk. This was true. It was also, I had begun to suspect, fear wearing maturity's coat. The evening it happened, she had had a catastrophic week. 2 clients had rejected final drafts after 3 full rounds of revision, the particular kind of rejection that arrives with detailed notes, meaning the work starts over and the timeline stays the same. Her landlord had sent notice of a rent increase, and her closest friend from university had called to say she was moving to Edinburgh in the spring. Happy news, delivered with apology, which made it harder to receive cleanly. By Friday evening, she had the quality of someone who has been managing things all week and has simply run out of management. I came over after work. I brought wine because she'd answered my earlier text with a single word, fine, in the tone that means the opposite. Her apartment smelled like turpentine and the takeaway she'd ordered and hadn't finished. The overhead light was on in the studio corner. Her desk was covered in reference prints and open sketchbooks and 3 coffee mugs in various stages of being forgotten. She was on the couch when I got there, knees drawn up, ring turning on her finger the way it did when she was thinking through something she couldn't resolve. She told me about the week efficiently, without performing the distress, just laying it out. I listened the way I listened to Margot, which was entirely without planning my response. When she'd finished, she looked at the ceiling for a moment. "I need to disappear for about 6 months," she said. And I looked at her, at the ceiling, at the studio corner, at the postcard above her desk with the pale stone village and the gray-blue sea, and I said, without entirely planning it, "So let's go." Somewhere like that. We send 2 emails saying we're unreachable. We pack 1 bag each, and we become someone else's problem for a while. I was smiling when I said it. I meant it as the thing that cheers someone up. The fantasy option, the brief and consequence-free imagining of the exit, the joke that lets you picture the door without walking through it. She didn't smile back. She looked at me. The head tilt once to the right. I watched the decision happen in real time, behind her eyes, and didn't know what I was watching. Then she set her wine glass down. "When?" she said. Flat, serious asking, I laughed. That is what I did with the silence that followed. I laughed and said something about finishing her current contracts first, and she made a sound that wasn't quite agreement, and I said something else I don't remember, and after a moment she picked her glass back up, and we moved on to other things. The evening continued the way our evenings did, easy and unhurried, past midnight without either of us deciding to make it that late. She walked me to her door when I left. She said, "Thanks for coming." I said I'd see her this week. She nodded and held my gaze for 1 second longer than the goodbye required and went back inside. On the walk to the cab, I told myself, she was being dry. She has that sense of humor, flat delivery, no tell. The joke lives in the straight face. She wasn't serious. The glass going down was coincidence. The head tilt was something else entirely. I had comprehensive explanations for all of it, and I organized them into a clean case on the way home. I had also, I should note, heard Margot Chen be dry approximately 800 times across 4 years. I knew exactly what it sounded like. I knew the specific register of it, the slight sharpening at the corners, the way her eyes did something private when she was enjoying her own joke. None of those things had been present. I filed this observation in a drawer I was not prepared to open yet. The problem with comprehensive explanations is that they require maintenance. By day 3, I had stopped being able to maintain this one. Not because new evidence had arrived, but because I kept returning to the exact specific quality of her voice when she said it. That was not dry. That was a person asking something they had been wanting to ask for longer than that particular Friday evening. The first thing I noticed, properly, for the first time, was the postcard. I was back at her apartment 4 days later, picking her up for something we'd planned weeks earlier. She was still getting ready and told me to let myself in with a spare key, which I had held for a year, which was its own piece of information I had been treating as logistical rather than meaningful. I stood in the studio corner and looked at the postcard above her desk. I had seen it, I estimated, somewhere near 100 times across 4 years. I had never actually looked at it until now. Small fishing village. Pale stone steps running down to a harbor. Boats. The sea in that particular color of gray-blue you only see in paintings and old photographs. The postcard was genuinely aged. The color bleached slightly at the edges. The paper softened and thickened at the corners. On the back, barely visible, there was faint handwriting. But I didn't turn it over. What I thought about was this. In 4 years of knowing exactly where she'd been and when, I had never heard her mention this place. She had kept a picture of somewhere she had meant to go, and had not gone. She was keeping it for a reason she had not explained to anyone. Certainly not to me. That landed with more weight than it had any right to. Given that I was standing alone in someone's studio corner, waiting for them to find their keys. The second thing was Patrick. Patrick had known both of us almost as long as we'd known each other, and the following week at a drinks gathering he and I were standing near the bar, while Margot was across the room. And he said, casually, between topics, she talks about you a lot, you know, not just mentions. Specifically, like it's a thing she thinks about. We're close, I said. He looked at me. Not a long look, just enough. Then someone came over and the conversation moved on. That look did not move on. I turned it over for the rest of the evening without finding an interpretation I was comfortable with. The third thing was a text she sent on a Tuesday morning. No message, just a link. I clicked it. A travel piece about the Normandy coast, small villages, gray skies. The kind of article written for people who want to go somewhere quiet rather than somewhere notable. I read it twice before I texted back. Interesting. She texted back. Yeah. That was the entire exchange. I set my phone face down and sat there. The fourth thing was the smallest and the most accurate. I had mentioned 2 months earlier that I was thinking about getting a new coffee machine. Mine was aging. The pressure was inconsistent. I'd brought it up once in passing and then moved on. I had not mentioned it since. But on a Saturday morning, she said, unprompted, that she'd looked at a specific model and it would probably work for how I made coffee. Not in a researched way. Just, she knew what I made, and she had found the right one and filed it until it was useful. She had been paying close, specific, ongoing attention to me. And I had been receiving this for 4 years as though it were simply the texture of her personality, rather than something directed specifically at me. I was having a slow and significant crisis of interpretation. The market was her idea, planned weeks before any of this. A Saturday morning, stalls along the canal. She had been wanting to go since the season started. The air smelled like cold river water and roasting nuts and the particular clean smell of a winter morning that hasn't warmed yet. The kind of day that makes a city look like something you chose rather than something you ended up in. She moved through the stalls the way she moved through most things, with purpose and without urgency. She stopped at a print cellar and picked up a small framed illustration, a coastal scene, loose lines, almost no color. She held it for a moment. She looked at me without saying anything. Then she set it back down and moved on. I did not ask why. I thought I understood. At lunch by the window of a place she liked. The food good, and the light gray, and the conversation we always had. Easy, ranging, no particular agenda. But there was something underneath it that had not been there before, or that I had not registered before, which may be the same thing. She was telling a story about a difficult client, and I watched her talk. I watched her hands when she was making a point. I watched the way she glanced at me when she was getting to the part she thought I'd find funny, checking whether I was following, whether I'd get it. She did this often, I realized. She had always done this. I had been receiving it for 4 years as closeness, as friendship, as the natural quality of someone who was genuinely present. I was no longer sure those words were sufficient. After lunch, we walked along the canal back the way we'd come. She had her hands in her coat pockets, and she was quiet in the comfortable way she was often quiet. Not absent, just not filling space that didn't need filling. I walked beside her and thought about the postcard, about the travel article she'd sent with no message, about Patrick's look, about how she'd found the right coffee machine and filed it away until it was useful. I was assembling a picture I had been refusing to look at directly for a very long time. She stopped at a railing above the water and leaned on it and looked out. The canal was dark and still in the winter light, the bare trees along the bank reflecting in it. She didn't say anything. I stood beside her and also didn't say anything. We stood there for perhaps 2 minutes without speaking, which was not unusual for us, except that it was different now, weighted in a way I had no clean word for. She looked at me sideways. Briefly, I was already looking at the water. I felt it anyway. We walked back to her building after and stood outside in the cold for a few minutes, the way we sometimes did when neither of us was quite ready for the day to end. Her coat collar was up. She was looking at the street. "I think about it," she said. She was not looking at me. She was not explaining what she meant by it. "I know," I said. She nodded once and went inside. I stood on the pavement for a longer moment than the cold warranted. She called the following morning. Not a text, an actual call. I picked up on the second ring. "Can you come over?" she said. I was there in 20 minutes. She had coffee already made, mine set on the counter in the mug she always used for me. The one she'd had longer than we'd known each other that she'd earmarked for guests, and then, at some point, had become mine specifically. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table. The studio corner was visible over her shoulder. The monitors, the stacked sketchbooks, the postcard above the desk, the pale village, the gray-blue sea. She was turning the silver ring on her finger. Slowly, "I've been thinking about what to say since last week," she said. I kept starting, and it sounded wrong. So I'm just going to say the version that's true, even if it's not tidy. She looked at me steadily. "I meant it," she said. "When? I wasn't being dry. I wasn't filling space. I was asking because I thought about it, us actually going somewhere, actually doing it, and it didn't feel like a joke. It felt like the obvious answer to a question I've been carrying around for a while. That landed quietly, the way the real things always do." Her ring stopped moving. "I know what this costs if I've read it wrong," she said. "I know what we're risking. You don't have to say anything that isn't true. If this isn't," she looked at her hands, "I'm not asking you to perform something you don't feel." "Margot," I said. She looked up. "You don't have to manage the outcome," I said. "If you want to walk it back, or qualify it, or find a version that asks less of both of us, that option is there. I'm not going anywhere." She looked at me for a long, careful moment. "I don't want to walk it back," she said. I set my mug down. "I called it a joke," I said, because I didn't know what to do with the fact that I meant it. I looked at her. I've been saying the version I thought I was allowed to say for 4 years. The careful version. The one that doesn't ask anything of either of us. I stopped. "I'm tired of the careful version." She went very still. "Every time I've thought about the next good thing," I said, "the next place I actually want to be, you're already in it. Not as someone I'm including. As the starting assumption. That has been true for longer than I've been willing to call it what it is." She stood up from her chair. She walked around the table and sat down beside me, and she didn't say anything. She reached over and covered my hand with hers. And she held it the way you hold something you have wanted to hold for a long time and are not going to be careless with. We sat like that for a moment. She looked up at the postcard. "I bought that in a bookshop," she said, quietly, It was tucked inside a coffee table book about coastal architecture. I just took it out and kept it. She looked at it. I've thought about going maybe 40 times. Why haven't you gone? She looked at me. I was waiting for the right company, she said. Something in my chest moved. Not dramatically, just completely. Then her phone buzzed on the table. A client email, arriving on a Sunday morning with the specific entitlement of clients who do not observe weekends. We both looked at it. She looked at the phone, then at me. We could become untraceable, she said. We could, I agreed. She left it unanswered. 4 months later we went to the coast. Not the French village, not yet, somewhere closer, a first trip, a proof of a theory we'd both been holding. We walked along a harbor in the cold, and she was exactly who she was in her apartment, and I was exactly who I was, just somewhere else. Which is what travel tells you about a person, whether they're the same one in new territory or somebody adjusted. She was the same one. The same attention, the same ring, the same laugh that arrived before she decided to allow it. I was still learning what that meant, and finding that the learning had no particular endpoint in sight, which was its own kind of discovery. A year after that, she took the postcard down from the wall. Not to throw it away, to pack it. We flew to France in March. The village was real and slightly different from the image, steeper than it looked, quieter in the off-season. The sea a specific blue that the postcard had come close to but not quite caught. We ate at a small place by the harbor, and she said, "It's better than I thought it would be." I said, "Most things are, when you go." She looked at me and did not say anything, and that was the whole conversation, which was enough. 2 years later, when people asked us how it started, what finally made us say it, she would say, "He made a joke he meant," and I asked him when, I would say. She set her glass down and said one word, and I laughed because I didn't know how to be brave yet. We agreed that the honest version was that it had been accumulating for 4 years in every small thing we'd kept and every careful explanation we'd built, and one Friday evening in her apartment, the accumulation simply refused to stay theoretical any longer.